This video is now in session, and the birth rate for the United States is steadily decreasing from previous years. And also, happy Memorial's Day. What better way to celebrate America by talking about how its population rate will decrease and how its population will decrease in several decades. But it's a pretty important thing to talk about. And if there's one thing that could destroy the United States in terms of its superpower status, it relates to the demographics of the U.S. and the population decrease that we've been seeing in recent years. Now, overall, the population of the United States has been increasing decade by decade, and that's a good thing. But the thing is, though, is that the birth rate, the fertility rate of the United States is decreasing. What you want is a fertility rate of 2.1 or higher, and that makes sense. So 2.1 children per woman, and what that pretty much means is that there needs to be two offsprings, at least two offsprings, 2.1 offsprings to be exact, in order to increase the population, and you need two offsprings in order to maintain the population. One for the paternal side and then one for the maternal side. But for the United States, the fertility rate is 1.73 births per woman. And compared to the United Kingdom, that's fine. Compared to Canada, it's fine. But it's not enough. It's definitely not enough if the United States wants to keep growing in the future. If this birth rate keeps staying at that status, then we're going to see an overall population decrease, which obviously is against the wishes of the United States, against what we want. And here you can see that the population has increased 7.4% since the 2010 census, but that's lower than previous censuses. It's been way higher in the past several decades compared to now. And there are a lot of reasons to explain this. Partially, urbanization is becoming a main factor in the lack of fertility. So urbanization meaning that there's not really a need to have children when you're in an urban lifestyle, because many times you have children, or I guess historically speaking, you have children because you want them to help you, but since there's not really that much to do at this point when you're in an urban environment, then you're not as incentivized to have a child. Another thing is that millennials and the newer generations that are taking over baby boomers, they generally don't want to have they generally don't want to have babies, and part of that is because of their work environment. They don't want to create offspring when they're in the middle of their work life, and with more women and men going into the workforce, it is becoming less of a need to have a child. And the other thing is, it's just culture. Like, you don't really imagine millennials having an offspring, and peer pressure does do a lot of things. Peer pressure definitely impacts the ability to have children, if you want to have children or not. If all of your friends who are millennials don't want to have children, then you're less likely to have children yourself. And that's a main problem for the United States, because this is happening to the newer generation. And as a result, even though we might not see this population decline for another 3 decades or so, when it does come, it's going to be really bad. And the United States has to fix this now, because if the United States wants to keep the United States wants to keep being a prosperous nation, it at least has to maintain the population that they do have, which is around 330 million residents in the United States. Now, in terms of solving this, it's not easy to solve this, because the easiest solutions to this problem is not the solution that most politicians want to take, which is either to increase taxes so that the government can fund older people, or the other thing is that they can try to they can try to put people out of retirement. They can try to make people work longer in their lifespan. And both solutions are not really that ideal, politically speaking, even though they're the easiest solutions, since ultimately the thing with a decrease in population is that the older people, the elderly, there will be higher numbers of them in comparison to the workforce, and the workforce generally tends themselves to the elderly. They help the elderly by contributing to the economy, which then allows the elderly to have high 401ks and the things that you need for retirement. And that's not happening with that's not going to happen if the population rate keeps decreasing. And now, in terms of what the United States is doing, what politicians are doing on Capitol Hill, it's not really that much. But there's only been one thing that's been talked about, and that's childcare, family care, which is having incentivizations for people to have children, which means that you have like paid leave, you have you have the proper health care coverage to have a child, and generally and maybe tax credits. Generally, it means that it makes it easier to have a child, and it may seem like a good idea, but let's compare that to. Let's put that in practice. So the United States doesn't have those kinds of child care policies, but Europe does. Most of the European countries do have it, like the United Kingdom. And let's go over to Sweden, who has the best child care. Actually, let's go to Germany because it's more of an established country. You can see here that Germany has a lot of child care support, like most other European countries, but their fertility rate is not that high, and it's not really much higher compared to the U.S. If we look at the U.S., actually it's lower than the U.S. It's 1.73 compared to 1.57. And here, even the highest here is France, and France has 1.88, which is only marginally better than the United States. And that's not a good sign for the entire world, but it's also not a good sign that child care will by itself solve these problems, because it's a cultural thing. If millennials, if Generation Zers don't want to have babies, then it doesn't matter how much incentives you give to them, they're just not going to produce offspring. And that means that it might have to resort to more harsh tactics. But unfortunately, we don't really have a good solution to this. There is one more solution, but it's something that the United States might not want to do, which is immigration. Immigration happens to increase the total amount of young people in the workforce. So if you have a lot of immigrants from nations who actually have fertility rates 2.1 or higher, then that allows you to maintain your population and properly care for the elderly, and that's something some countries have done, and that might pose an effective solution, but the United States might not be willing to do that, judging by the previous administration. The Trump administration was pretty anti-immigration, and as a result, that solution might also be out of the door in terms of a consistent solution, because if one major party does not like immigration, then something like immigration is not going to happen sustainably in the long term. And from there, what comes next? Are there any other solutions that the United States could try? Maybe not, because there has really not been any other solution that's been implemented around the world that has actually shown to be effective in increasing fertility rates past 2.1. And that will be one of the greatest challenges the United States will have to face in the coming decades, as the fertility rate constantly plateaus at this pretty low rate. And at least, look, the United States is doing better than some nations in terms of fertility rate. Like, if you compare it to China, China's about 1.69, but that's from the official estimates. The actual estimates could be, the actual statistics may be as low as 1.2, which is not a good thing for China at all, because and that's an effect, or that's a problem of their one-child policy, because they used to have a one-child policy where you could at most only have one child, and that created a culture that that you should not have offspring because you might be punished for doing so, and that in China might stick for several decades to come, just like how the culture of not having children in the United States might stick for decades to come. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.